This Sunday on Capital Connection, could Governor Pritzker extend his order to stay at home beyond April 7th?
The question that everyone wants answered right now is, how long is all of this going to last? The honest answer is, we don't yet know.
We examine the expert study Governor Pritzker used to issue that executive order, plus the push to protect and equip our heroes in hospitals.
I have medical professionals and first responders begging for things that they need to keep them safe.
We have seen with this infection, staff getting sick themselves. An entire workforce is being cut in half in a 2 or 1 day period.
And what the state is doing to provide places for patients and to recruit people to treat them.
Over 1,000 medical and non-medical volunteers have registered to help in our fight against COVID-19.
And as cases of the coronavirus surge, so do jobless claims.
This is just an unprecedented number of people that are seeking unemployment.
The state website to file unemployment claims sputters and sags under the weight of a crush of new claims as millions of Americans start their work week without the promise of a paycheck.
We are very concerned about the physical and the mental health of individuals.
And all the economic anxiety spurs businesses to ask, when can they get back to work?
We've shut down thousands of businesses in the state of Illinois.
It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell, reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, March 29. Cases of the coronavirus continue to climb in Illinois, but however frightful and fatal that pathogen may be, it faces a formidable foe, our heroes on the front lines who wear white, our doctors and nurses putting their own lives at risk in a noble effort to save others.
While we are telling the public to shelter in place, to stay at home, we are asking them to go where the patients are, to go where the illness is, to save their lives.
12 nurses treating patients at the University of Illinois Hospital in Chicago came down with the coronavirus this week. Their union claims the nurses did not have enough personal protective equipment like masks and gloves to keep them safe. But Governor Pritzker said that help is on the way.
Emergency workers are delivering new containers of nearly 1 million units of personal protective equipment like masks and gloves to healthcare workers in Edwardsville, in Champaign, and in Peoria.
As doctors and nurses continue to treat sick patients and the state races to buy the gear they need, some people continue to meet in large groups in public spaces, violating Governor Pritzker's order to stay home and potentially spreading a deadly virus.
If you're doing these things, you are spitting in the face of the doctors and nurses and first responders who are risking everything so that you can survive. If you get a loved one sick because you didn't stay inside, they will have to travel alone to the hospital without you by their side to comfort them and look after them, because hospitals and healthcare centers can't afford to accommodate visitors right now.
Illinois' 200-plus hospitals are racing to build out enough bed space to prepare for a worst-case scenario where tens of thousands of patients sick with the coronavirus could flood their facilities in just 2 weeks' time. The Illinois National Guard is scouring empty hospitals and hotel rooms. The state is setting up emergency overflow triage tents, and hospitals are taking steps to stop elective surgeries, expand telemedicine to treat patients at home, and to build out the unused space they have now. Still, even with more volunteers and retired medical professionals back on the job and more places to treat the patients, hospital executives say that won't be enough to treat everyone if they don't get the supplies they desperately need.
We have seen with this infection, staff getting sick themselves. An entire workforce is being cut in half in a 2 or 1 day period. We have physically transformed our hospital to address these needs. We've expanded our emergency department. We've transformed entire units into COVID hospitals, like mini units that are designed to take care of patients, specifically with this disease.
Wednesday, the White House promised Governor Pritzker FEMA would send Illinois 300 more ventilators and 300,000 masks. One projection from the Illinois Department of Public Health found Illinois could need 3 times more ventilators than we have available now and 10 times more ventilators than President Trump promised.
We need millions of masks and hundreds of thousands of gowns.
1 week ago, Governor Pritzker went on national television to pressure the president to take action.
This should have been a coordinated effort by the federal government and the National Defense Authorization that the president has to, to essentially push this manufacturing really hasn't gone into effect in any way.
4 days later, Pritzker again repeated calls for President Trump to require American companies to make ventilators.
Well, there is nothing that's been exercised with regard to the Defense Production Act. Every day I have pounded the table on the Defense Production Act and to make sure that the president is doing what he can do. He's not doing everything he can do. We need to protect the United States. He has the power to do that. I implore him to take up the Defense Production Act and actually utilize it from industry to industry.
Then on Friday,
President Trump yesterday went on a talk show to question whether Americans really need more ventilators to save people's lives.
Last night you told Sean Hannity you didn't think that there was a need for 30 or 40,000 ventilators, yet today you basically federalized General Motors to produce tens of thousands.
Well, I think there's a very good chance we won't need that many. And I think, frankly, there's a great chance that we're not going to need that many.
To say that these comments are counterproductive is an understatement. And frankly, at worst, the comments are deadly. We need exactly what we're asking for, perhaps more. If we don't get the equipment we need, more people will die.
During Pritzker's press conference, President Trump signed an order requiring General Motors to produce ventilators and accused the automaker of wasting time.
This afternoon, I invoke the Defense Production Act to compel General Motors to accept, perform, and prioritize federal contracts for ventilators. Ventilators are a big deal.
That is really great news. Invoking the Defense Production Act is so vitally important. As I said to the president directly, look, he's a businessman. He didn't want to interfere with the capital market, with the capitalist market. He wants business people to do what they do. That's all well and good, but we are in a crisis. We are in a national crisis.
This invocation of the DPA should demonstrate clearly to all that we will not hesitate to use the full authority of the federal government to combat this crisis.
This country's economy takes a turn for the worse, and Congress rides to the rescue. How state and federal governments are attempting to provide relief in a public health crisis that spurred a financial disaster.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
One of the positive side effects of the coronavirus, especially for you procrastinators out there, you get 90 days more to file your state tax returns. Governor Pritzker announced Illinois would mirror the federal government's move to delay the deadline after Senate Minority Leader Bill Brady urged Governor Pritzker to take that action to give accountants, business owners, and workers alike enough time to file their taxes and keep their distance from each other. And that's not the only financial relief that the government is providing, as Congress cooked up a $2.2 trillion disaster recovery package. President Trump signed into law on Friday.
Something miraculous has happened in Washington. We've actually done something.
I've never signed anything with a T on it.
The American people needed this rescue package. They needed it quickly.
The damage is worse than the impacts of 9/11 and the 2008 recession combined.
Hotels are just one sector of Illinois' economy suffering staggering losses after Governor Pritzker banned all non-essential travel through at least April 7th in an effort to contain the spread of the coronavirus.
I understand how difficult it is to see the economy slow down and watch friends and neighbors laid off from jobs. Those concerns keep me up at night, too. This is just an unprecedented number of people that are seeking unemployment.
I heard it could be 6 million, could be 7 million. It's 3.3 or 3.2, but it's a lot of jobs. But I think we'll come back very strong. The sooner we get back to work, every day that we stay out, it gets harder to bring it back very quickly.
We are in the midst of the worst economic disaster that we've seen in my lifetime.
Illinois workers are afraid they will lose their jobs if they have not already. Small businesses are making hard decisions between keeping staff or closing their doors.
Over 130,000 Illinoisans have lost their jobs. This is unprecedented.
But it's our Main Street businesses. It's our Main Street companies that line the streets of every rural community that I represent and line the streets of this great country that are hurting the most. It is their economic disaster They're being told that they are not able to operate. We need to do better.
Even in rural southern Illinois, there are 27 cases in my district. Folks, we need to come together in a bipartisan manner with this bill to deal with, first, the health of our constituents. Second, the health of their pocketbooks in this bill. Third, those businesses where they need to go back to work, whether it's a small business or a large business.
The White House suggested, both parties agreed, with a cash payment, primarily to people making less than $75,000 a year and not more than $100,000 a year, as individuals will receive $1,200 for each adult in the household and $500 for each child. For some people, that really is money that they desperately need to get through this difficult time.
And Senate Minority Leader, Senate Republican Bill Brady joins us now remotely from Bloomington. Senator, it's good to have you with us. We've seen pretty staggering speed from government, relatively speaking, compared to what we normally expect, especially from Congress and even from Springfield. But it's interesting to watch what government's doing here. They're banning evictions. They're pausing the due date on taxes. They're giving special relief to the homeless. They're giving aid, putting money right in people's pockets, pausing utility shutoffs, offering low-interest loans. We're just seeing all this compassionate surge of action from government in the face of this crisis. Isn't it interesting that that's the reaction, to tap into our compassionate nature and to pump the brakes on some of the more punitive taxes or penalties or things of that nature? What does that tell us about the nature of our government?
Well, I know my discussion with the members of my caucus and other members of the General Assembly and the governor, and particularly members of my caucus, we are very concerned about the physical and the mental health of individuals. We also know that we are going to have to rebuild this economy after we tame this virus. And the things that we do now can lay the groundwork to enhance the livelihood of people's lives after we tame this virus and put people on the right footing. So I think these acts of compassion or good planning are in the heart and soul of, I know, the members of my caucus and others. So I think it speaks greatly to the compassion that we in Illinois have for Illinois people.
We've seen a lot of pressure in the public discussion, and we've seen reports about it in private from business groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce trying to bend President Trump's ear to, quote unquote, reopen the U.S. economy. But of course, governors will ultimately be the ones who are in the seat who make those decisions state by state. But aren't we in Illinois already pot committed here, if you will? We've already given that order to stay at home, to pause non-essential business operations. How do you walk away from the table halfway through if we know that curve has not yet been flattened and it hasn't started to come down? Right now, we're still on the upswing.
Well, that's a difficult question. It was our question when the governor decided he wanted to implement this. And whether you agree with the governor's decision or not, we're in a position where we want to work with it. But looking for relief in areas. Illinois is a very diverse state. We've suggested that opening up parks, maybe even considering protocols for other businesses being able to open if they abide by the protocols that work toward prevent the spread, need to be in consideration. And that one size order doesn't fit everything. So we're very open to the idea that some things could be reopened under certain protocols, but first and foremost, maintaining the public safety.
All right, Senator. Well, thanks for joining us. Be well and stay safe.
You too, Mark. Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back with Todd Maisch from the Illinois Chamber of Commerce as employers assess the damage of the worst week of layoffs in American history.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
As Congress delivers emergency relief in an effort to try and stabilize the nation's sputtering economy, the state of Illinois is undergoing a debate right now about whether or not to extend Governor Pritzker's order to stay at home beyond the original date of April 7. And if so, should that new order apply to the entire state?
I want to be 100% clear about what will drive my decision-making in the weeks ahead. Science.
There are severe economic costs to the executive order.
According to this study from math and medical experts at the University of Illinois, the cost of inaction would have been exponentially greater.
We are relying upon epidemiologists, some of the best in the world, frankly, on our great public health director and her staff, and on the statisticians and those who are modelers.
The study warned Illinois could have seen 12 times as many sick patients hospitalized from the coronavirus and 6 times as many deaths if it waited just 3 weeks more to institute a lockdown.
The sacrifices that you are making are saving lives.
The cases are very scarce throughout downstate.
Senate Republican Dale Ryder points out that model was built to measure a rapid spread of a virus in a city with as many people in it as Chicago.
We need to have a conversation about whether or not we should regionalize the executive order. The governor should regionalize the executive order.
Ryder said if cases remain low downstate, he'll urge the governor to consider letting regions of Illinois out from under the order to stay at home.
The virus knows no regional boundaries. So as you see, we have COVID cases all across the state. People didn't believe me when I was saying that. When it was just in Cook County, there were people in other parts of the state who said, it'll never come here. This is just a Chicago problem or just a Cook County problem. Well, now we've seen it every region, an increasing number of cases in central and southern Illinois, in northwestern Illinois. We need to make sure that we're tracking all of that, that we're doing everything we can for all the areas of the state. And as we look at the aftermath, at the past the peak here, which seems hard to look for at the moment as we watch the numbers rise, but as we look past the peak, we'll certainly be evaluating whether there are measures that we can take in whether it's regionally based or based on the type of industry where we can start to ratchet down the stay-at-home orders or the the other orders that have been put in place.
And Todd Maisch joins us remotely from the Illinois Chamber of Commerce now. Todd, I wonder what you make first of that startling headline we saw from the U.S. Department of Labor on Thursday, that big, glaring red number, 3.3 million Americans filing a claim for unemployment. That's a record number. We've never seen it before. Are businesses, even now, are they able yet to come to terms with just how severe that short-term crisis will be for them as their customers, their clients, and many of their counterparts are counting their losses right now?
It's unprecedented. Nobody's been through this before. That's what happens. We're going to have record numbers. So I think that there is a sense that there's no reason for panic. It's very, very important, of course, and as you said, startling. It is amazing. However, I will tell you that it backs up something we've been saying for a long time, is that there isn't just one crisis facing us, which is the public health crisis, which is very, very important, making sure that our first responders and our hospitals have adequate needs met. But there's the financial and economic crisis that is right behind it, and that's what these numbers point to. We think there's been a little bit of an imbalance in terms of government response to the two crises, and I think after these numbers, we've really got to refocus back on the economic side of things.
Aren't those two inextricably intertwined? It seems that if all hands were on deck trying to eradicate or tame the virus, first, that the economy would naturally start or more easily start to bounce back as soon as that first problem was done. I wonder, shouldn't that be priority 1A, the public health crisis?
We clearly are intertwined. We wouldn't have this crisis on the economic side if it weren't for the public health side. But government's reaction has been bifurcated, and one side has gotten more attention than the other. We've shut down thousands of businesses in the state of Illinois, and maybe that was appropriate, but we haven't given them enough support, in our opinion. The governor made some steps yesterday that are helpful. The unemployment insurance steps he made earlier were positive as well. But the governor has shown great leadership on this issue. We just think there needs to be recognition that there are two avenues the government can help, and that the economic side needs a little more attention.
On the public health side, we have been looking at this curve. I wonder what a curve like that might look like for jobs. Obviously, we're seeing that massive spike of jobless claims right now in the short term. But as we see relief from Congress, do we know how many idea how many of these jobs might be short-term losses where workers can just jump right back onto the job as soon as their business reopens overnight? Or do we know how many of those jobs might vanish completely? They might go away if we fail to eradicate this virus in 3 weeks or in 4 weeks. What does that timeline look like, and what's the tipping point in where this economy could be headed if we don't clean this up quickly?
I think there are lots and lots of questions, really, really good questions. There are not a lot of great answers because, again, this is unprecedented. So I do think that a lot of those bars and restaurants that have been shut down are not going to come back if this goes much farther. And also if the assistance that's in the pipeline doesn't get to them quickly, because it's about cash flow. It's about, can we go ahead and furlough people as opposed to laying them off? Lots of very, very good questions, very pertinent questions you're asking them. But the answers, we're just going to have to see. That's why, again, I keep coming back. The government, both federal government, state government, and local governments, to the extent they can, need to ease the burden as much as possible on employers if we want those jobs to come back as quickly as they can.
All right, Todd Maisch from the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. Todd, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
And we're back in just one moment. That does it for us today. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll be right back here at the same time next Sunday. For Capital Connection, I'm Mark Maxwell.